A widow says I'd never kiss a slave, then she drags him from the river and won't stop breathing life into his lungs. A proud woman stands on the ferry landing while storm clouds gather overhead. Town matrons whisper behind gloved hands as she declares her line in the sand. Then the skiff overturns and a field hand goes under, and she plunges into dark water without hesitation. On the muddy planks, she puts her mouth to his and breathes again and again until he gasps back to life. But in the shocked silence that follows, a small kitchen girl sees something the grown folks missed: cramped ink hidden in the margins of the family Bible, promising freedom with a green seal. Patrollers ride hard through the cypress swamp. Papers crinkle in trembling hands. The courthouse bell tolls as secrets 3 years buried claw their way toward daylight. When mercy breaks every rule of society and hidden promises demand their day in court, will truth spoken in public square set a man free or destroy the woman who dared to save his life? The kitchen stirred before dawn broke over the cypress knees. Steam curled off iron pots while Lila's bare feet found their place on the worn planks. 9 years old, with hands quick as hummingbird wings, she ladled cornmeal into bowls and hummed a tune that made the room settle. The melody rose from somewhere deep in her chest, pure as church bells, steady as river current. When the kennel dogs started their morning racket beyond the kitchen door, her voice lifted one clear note. The barking stopped. The kitchen hands paused their stirring. Even the fire seemed to quiet its crackling. "Child's got a gift," Mama Ruth whispered, flour dusting her dark hands. She kneaded biscuit dough with the rhythm Leela's humming set. Steadies everything around her. Leela touched the ribbon at her wrist, a scrap of blue cotton tied in a bow. She tapped it 3 times with her thumb, counting the beat before she sang. The ribbon had belonged to her grandmother, who died before Lila could remember her face. But the songs stayed. They always stayed. Footsteps clicked across the front hall. Eliza Harrow entered the kitchen with her ledger book, tucked under one arm, grey dress buttoned to her throat. The plantation mistress moved like someone carrying glass, careful, distant, afraid something might break. "Morning, Mrs. Harrow," Mama Ruth said, not looking up from her dough. Eliza nodded and opened her ledger on the wooden table. Her pen scratched across the columns, stores counted, supplies needed, debts that followed her like shadows. 2 years since her husband died, 2 years of doing sums that never came out even. Lila kept humming while she swept ashes from the hearth. The tune wound through the kitchen like incense, settling nerves and smoothing sharp edges. She watched Eliza's face soften just a degree as the melody worked its quiet magic. Heavy boots stomped on the back porch. Overseer Graves pushed through the door, without knocking, bringing the smell of tobacco and sour sweat. His leather coat dripped with morning dew. "Need to talk grain prices," he said to Eliza, ignoring the kitchen hands completely. "Got a buyer coming up from Natchez. Cash money," Eliza kept writing in her ledger. "The grain's spoken for. Feed stores for winter. Winter's months off. This buyer's here now." Graves pulled a crumpled paper from his coat. "See these debts? They ain't waiting for winter neither." The scratching of Eliza's pen stopped. Lila heard it, the change in the room's breathing. Fear crept in like fog off the river. "We've discussed this," Eliza said quietly. Her voice held firm, but Lila caught the tremor underneath. Graves leaned closer. "Discussing don't pay creditors, selling does." He tapped the paper with one thick finger. "You're running short on time and shorter on choices." Through the window, Lila watched the sky lighten over the landing. A ferry would dock before midday, bringing townfolk with their talk and their watching eyes. Eliza straightened in her chair, pride settling over her like armor. "I'll make my own choices about what gets sold," she said. Graves straightened too, but his stance was all threat. "Will you now? Hope you're choosing wise." He left the same way he'd come, heavy boots, slamming door, the smell of trouble lingering after. Eliza's hands shook as she closed the ledger. Lila set down her broom and hummed a softer tune, one that felt like gentle hands on fevered brows. The melody wrapped around Eliza's shoulders, and her breathing slowed. "Thank you," Eliza whispered, so quiet Lila almost missed it. Mama Ruth caught Lila's eye across the kitchen. Something passed between them, understanding, worry, the weight of watching someone balance on a knife's edge. The dog started barking again, sharper now. Voices carried from the river landing. Lila moved to the window and saw the ferry's outline in the lifting fog, its poles cutting through grey water like prayers through silence. "Ferry's early today," Mama Ruth said. Eliza stood and smoothed her skirt. "Town ladies will be aboard. They'll expect proper receiving." She walked toward the door, then paused. "Lila." "Yes, You're humming. It does settle things." Eliza's voice was careful, like someone testing ice. "I noticed that." Warmth spread through Lila's chest. It wasn't praise exactly, but it was something. Recognition. A crack in the wall between kitchen and parlor, between them and us. "Thank you, ma'am," Lila said. Eliza nodded once and left. Lila watched her walk toward the front of the house, straight-backed, chin up, carrying her loneliness like a banner. "She's got more weight on her than she can bear," Mama Ruth said, working butter into her biscuit dough. "I see it," Lila whispered, and she did see it in Eliza's careful movements, her quick glances toward the ledger, the way she held herself apart from everyone, even her own grief. The ferry. Horn sounded across the water, long and low, like a hymn sung in a minor key. Lila touched her ribbon and tapped the beat, 3 times for courage, 3 times for hope, 3 times for whatever the morning might bring. Steam curled off the kettles as Eliza stepped toward the river, and Lila, wiping her hands, fell in 2 paces behind. The landing sat where the bayou met the main channel, cypress knees poking up through fog like the fingers of drowned giants. Ferry poles clacked against the dock as the boat settled into its berth. Passengers stepped onto wet planks, merchants with sample cases, a preacher clutching his Bible, and 3 town matrons in dark bonnets who moved like crows settling on a fence. Lila stayed behind Eliza, close enough to hear but far enough to fade into the background. She'd learned the art of being invisible useful when white folks wanted to speak freely. Eliza Harrow, called the tallest of the matrons, Mrs. Whitmore. "How pleasant to see you receiving properly again." Eliza inclined her head. "Ladies, I trust your crossing was smooth." "Smooth enough." Mrs. Whitmore's eyes swept the landing, taking in every detail for later gossip. "Though we did pass that dreadful slave coffle on the Natchez Road. Such a sight. All those field hands chained together like animals." "Market's been busy," agreed Mrs. Foster, the second matron, prices holding steady for strong backs. Lila felt her stomach tighten. Talk of selling always made the air thick and dangerous. "Speaking of which, Mrs. Whitmore continued, "We heard rumors about your overseer making inquiries in town. Surely you're not considering reducing your household?" Eliza's spine straightened. "I manage my household as I see fit." "Of course, dear, but one does worry about a woman alone, making such decisions." Mrs. Whitmore's voice dripped false sympathy. "Especially when it comes to mixing with the quarters." The third matron, Mrs. Caldwell, tittered behind her gloved hand. "Heavens, yes. One must maintain proper distance, proper standards." Lila watched clouds building on the horizon, dark and heavy, moving fast. The air pressed down like a weight, and the ferry rocked harder at its mooring. "Standards," Eliza repeated, her voice cooling. "Yes, one must." "Exactly, Mrs." Whitmore leaned closer. "Just this morning we were discussing how important it is for a lady in your position to make her feelings clear. About boundaries. About what simply isn't done." The trap was closing. Lila could feel it, the careful words, the watching eyes, the way they'd cornered Eliza on the landing with nowhere to retreat. Pride was Eliza's weakness, and they knew it. "Perhaps you could enlighten us, Mrs. Foster said sweetly, "about your particular standards regarding close contact with your property." Thunder rumbled in the distance. The wind picked up, setting the ferry poles to creaking. But the matrons pressed closer, waiting for their answer. Eliza looked across the water, then back at the women. When she spoke, her voice carried clear across the landing. "I'd never kiss a slave." The words hit Lila like cold water, sharp, final, the line drawn in public view. Mrs. Whitmore smiled with satisfaction. Such clarity, such proper thinking. But the storm was coming fast now. The sky turned the color of old pewter, and the wind whipped spray across the dock. Shouts rose from the ferry as crew secured loose cargo. That's when the skiff appeared, small boat fighting the current, one man at the oars. Lila squinted through the spray and recognized Jonah, the field hand who worked the far cotton. He was rowing hard against the wind, trying to reach the landing before the storm broke full. "Fool's going to drown himself," muttered the ferry captain. The wind gusted fierce and sudden. The skiff tilted, caught a wave wrong, and flipped. Jonah disappeared under the dark water. "Man overboard!" someone shouted. The matrons shrieked and backed away from the dock's edge. Ferry crew grabbed poles and ropes, but the current was running fast and the waves kicked high. Lila stepped forward, scanning the water. Her eyes caught movement, a hand breaking the surface 20 yards downstream. Then it went under again. "There," she called, pointing through the fog. Eliza followed Lila's finger and saw him too. Without hesitation, she kicked off her shoes and waded into the river. The current pulled at her skirts, but she fought deeper. "Eliza!" "Mrs. Whitmore called. "What are you doing? Come back." But Eliza was swimming now, grey dress billowing around her like storm clouds. The ferry captain threw a rope, and she caught it, using it to guide herself to where Jonah had gone under. Lila watched, heart hammering. The water was dark as coffee, the current treacherous. Eliza dove once, came up empty-handed. Dove again. On the third try, she surfaced with Jonah in her arms. "Pull them in," the captain shouted. Hands hauled on the rope, dragging both of them toward the dock. Jonah wasn't moving, water streaming from his mouth and nose. They lifted him onto the planks. His lips were blue, his chest still. "He's gone," Mrs. Foster whispered. Eliza knelt beside him, soaked and shaking. She tilted his head back, opened his mouth, and put her lips to his. Breathed life into his lungs. The matrons gasped. "Eliza!" She didn't hear them. Breathed again. Again. Her hands pressed his chest, counting compressions the way her father had taught her when she was small and a stable boy had nearly drowned in the horse trough. "I'd never kiss a slave," Mrs. Whitmore quoted in horror. Eliza breathed into Jonah's lungs once more, then again. Her hair hung wet and wild, her dress ruined with river mud. She didn't stop, wouldn't stop. Jonah's chest hitched, river water poured from his mouth. He coughed, gasped, and his eyes opened. Eliza sat back on her heels, breathing hard. Jonah looked up at her, confused and grateful. Around them, the storm lashed the landing, but for one moment, everything else was still. "Dear Lord," Mrs. Caldwell whispered. The matron stared at Eliza, dripping on the planks, at Jonah breathing beneath her hands, at the line she'd just crossed in front of everyone. Reputation was everything in their world, and reputations could drown faster than men in dark water. Mrs. Whitmore's voice cut through the rain like a blade. "What have you done?" Eliza looked up, her eyes fierce and bright, what anyone with mercy would do. She helped Jonah sit up, checking his breathing, ignoring the gasps and whispers around her. The storm drummed on the dock, but Lila heard something else underneath the sound of a world shifting, of careful walls cracking open. With Jonah breathing shallow on the planks and rain drilling the river, Eliza said, "Bring him to the kitchen now." Herb steam filled the kitchen, mint and willow bark boiled together in iron pots. The smell wrapped around them like a healing embrace, while Lila helped Jonah to a chair by the hearth. His clothes dripped river water onto the worn planks, but his breathing was steady now, deep and grateful. Mama Ruth moved between stove and table, gathering remedies. "Willow tea for the shock," she murmured, spooning bark shavings into a cup. "Mint to ease his breathing, honey to warm his blood." Eliza stood beside the window, arms wrapped tight around herself. Her grey dress clung to her frame, and her hair hung loose from its pins. She watched Jonah with careful eyes, as if afraid he might stop breathing again. "Thank you, ma'am," Jonah said quietly. His voice was rough from the river water, but grateful. Wasn't expecting to see daylight again. Eliza nodded without speaking. Her hands shook from cold or shock or the weight of what she'd done on those planks. Lila picked up her broom and began a slow, gentle tune. Not words, just melody that rose and fell like easy breathing. She watched Jonah's chest as she hummed, timing the rhythm to match his inhaling and exhaling. The music seemed to steady him, to ease the last traces of panic from his lungs. "That's real nice," Jonah said, closing his eyes. "Like my grandmother used to sing." The song worked its quiet magic. Jonah's shoulders relaxed, his breathing deepened further. Even Eliza's shaking began to still. Heavy boots on the porch shattered the peace. Graves burst through the door, anger radiating off him like heat from a forge. "What in hell happened down there?" he demanded. "Half the county's talking about you jumping in the river after this boy." "Jonah, nearly drowned," Eliza said calmly. "I helped him." "Helped him?" Graves's face reddened. "You put your mouth on his, in front of God and everybody." Silence fell over the kitchen. Mama Ruth kept stirring her herbs. Lila kept humming, but softer now. Jonah stared at the floor. "A man was dying," Eliza said. "A slave was dying. There's a difference." Graves paced the kitchen like a caged animal. "You just cost yourself respect, reputation, standing in this community. All for a field hand, all for a human being." Graves stopped pacing. "Human being? He's property, Eliza. Chattels. Work animals that walk on two legs." He gestured at Jonah without looking at him. "This one's worth maybe $600 if he's healthy. You just tangled yourself up in $600 of trouble." "Get out of my kitchen," Eliza said quietly. "Your kitchen?" Graves laughed, but the sound was ugly. "Your kitchen in a house mortgaged to the rafters, on land you can't afford to keep?" He pulled the crumpled papers from his coat again. "These debts don't care about your conscience, Eliza. They want cash, money, and selling stock is the fastest way to raise it." He looked directly at Jonah now, calculating. Strong back, healthy lungs, though they got a good dunking today, should still bring decent money at the Natchez market. "No," Eliza stepped between Graves and Jonah. "He's not for sale. Everything's for sale when the bills come due, and they're coming due fast." Graves tucked the papers away. "I'll give you tonight to think it through, but come morning, decisions get made, with or without your blessing." The door slammed behind him. In the quiet that followed, they could hear rain drumming on the roof and dogs whimpering in their kennels. "Lila," Eliza said finally, "sing something, please." Lila's voice rose again, a lullaby this time, one about rivers running to the sea and travelers finding their way home. She watched Jonah's face as she sang, saw peace settle over his features, like a benediction. Outside, the storm was passing. But inside the kitchen, in the space between the song and the silence, everything had changed. When the thunder moved off, Lila slipped into the front parlor to fetch a cloth and saw the old family Bible left open on the desk. The Bible lay spread across the mahogany desk like a bird with broken wings. Lamplight flickered over yellowed pages and thin red ribbon bookmarks. Lila had dusted around the holy book 100 times, but she'd never seen it opened, like this, vulnerable, exposed, pages rippling in the draft from the front door. She glanced toward the kitchen, listening. Mama Ruth was singing low while she worked. Eliza was talking quiet with Jonah. No footsteps approached. Lila moved closer to the desk. The Bible was old leather cover, cracked and worn smooth, gold lettering faded to whispers. It had belonged to Eliza's father, then her husband, and now sat like a judgment on the family's struggles. The open page showed the beginning of Matthew, familiar verses about generations and begetting, but something else caught Lila's eye. In the narrow margin, cramped between the binding and the text, someone had written in faded ink. Lila leaned closer. The writing was small, squeezed into the tiny space like a secret. She traced each letter with her finger, sounding out words she'd learned from the kitchen Bible readings. "Jonah," she whispered. The name was clear enough. Below it, a date 3 years past. Then words that made her heart jump. Manumission, upon presentation, probate, clerk, green seal, footsteps in the hall. Lila spun as Nettie, the housemaid, entered with an armful of mending. "Child, what you doing in here?" Nettie asked, not unkindly. "Just fetching a cloth for the kitchen," Lila stammered. "For cleaning." Nettie's eyes went to the open Bible, then back to Lila. She was older, wiser, and she knew when someone was wrestling with more than they could say. "Bible's heavy reading for a child," Nettie said carefully. "Yes," Lila closed the book gently, her mind racing. The words burned in her memory, Jonah's name, the date, the promise of freedom hidden in ink and silence. "Kitchen's calling," Nettie said. "Best get back." Lila nodded and slipped past her, heart pounding. In the hallway, she pressed her back against the wall and closed her eyes, fixing every word in her memory the way she memorized song verses. Jonah, manumission, Probate clerk, green seal, a paper promising freedom, hidden in the margins of the Word of God. But hidden from whom and why? That evening, Lila sat on the kitchen porch with her knees drawn up, watching fireflies dance over the quarters. The air was thick with the smell of honeysuckle and the distant sound of someone playing fiddle. Inside, lamplight flickered where Mama Ruth finished the last of the washing up. Eliza had gone to bed early, exhausted by the day's events. Jonah was settled in the back room with willow tea and strict orders to rest. The plantation had settled into its nighttime rhythms, dogs dozing by the hearth, chickens roosting in their coops, the soft murmur of voices from the quarters. But Lila's mind wouldn't rest. The words from the Bible margin circled in her thoughts like hawks. She touched her ribbon and tapped 3 times, once for Jonah's name, once for the promise, once for the mystery that connected them. Manumission. She'd heard the word whispered sometimes, in the quarters when folks thought children weren't listening. It meant freedom, legal freedom, with papers to prove it. But such papers were rare as miracles in Mississippi. "Child, you look like you're studying something powerful," Mama Ruth said, settling beside her on the porch steps. "Mama," Lila said carefully, "what's a probate clerk?" "Probate?" Mama Ruth's eyebrows rose. "That's courthouse business. When somebody dies, they look at the will and such, decide who gets what." She studied Lila's face. "Why are you asking about courthouse business?" Lila touched her ribbon again. How could she explain what she'd seen without getting herself and Nettie into trouble? "Just heard some talk today. Wondered what it meant." "Talk's dangerous around here," Mama Ruth said quietly. "Especially talk about courthouse things. You remember that?" They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fireflies weave their brief magic in the darkness. Somewhere in the quarters, a woman was singing low and mournful, like a prayer set to music. "Mama," Lila said finally, "if somebody had papers that said they were free, but the papers were lost or hidden, would they still be free?" Mama Ruth was quiet for a long moment. "Papers are tricky things," she said at last. "Law says one thing, but men in power say another. Papers can disappear, get lost, get forgotten." She put her arm around Lila's shoulders. "But sometimes papers find their way back to the light. When the time's right, when the need's great enough. How? Takes courage, and help from folks who know right from wrong." Mama Ruth's voice was soft but sure. "And sometimes it takes a child with good eyes and a faithful heart." Lila looked up at her mother's face in the firefly light. "You think Graves means to sell people?" "I think Graves means to do whatever keeps his pockets full and his conscience quiet." Mama Ruth's jaw tightened. "But selling's one thing, legal selling's another. Big difference between the two." A dog barked in the distance, answered by another closer by. The sound echoed across the water, carrying news and warnings in languages older than words. "Get on to bed now," Mama Ruth said, standing. "Tomorrow's another day, and it'll bring what it brings." Lila rose and started toward the kitchen door, then paused. "Mama, if somebody found important papers that could help somebody, what should they do?" Mama Ruth studied her daughter's face for a long moment. "They should pray for wisdom. And they should remember that truth has a way of rising to the surface, like cream or oil or air bubbles." She touched Lila's cheek gently. "But mostly, they should trust that the Lord sees everything, even words hidden in dark corners." Inside the kitchen, Lila banked the fire and blew out the lamps. But as she climbed the narrow stairs to her small room above the pantry, her mind was bright with possibility. Somewhere in the margins of the family Bible, Jonah's freedom waited in cramped ink and faded hope. And somehow, some way, she was going to help that freedom find its way to light. Dawn came grey and anxious, with the smell of rain still heavy in the air. Lila woke to the sound of voices in the kitchen below, worried voices that made her stomach tighten with dread. She dressed quickly and crept down the narrow stairs. Eliza sat at the kitchen table with her ledger spread open, pen moving across numbers that refused to add up right. Mama Ruth stood at the stove, stirring cornmeal mush with more force than necessary. Between them, the air crackled with unspoken tensions. "Mornings come, whether we want it or not," Mama Ruth said, without turning around. "Morning, and debts with it." Eliza's voice was flat, exhausted. "Graves was right about one thing. The bills won't wait." Lila slipped to her place by the hearth and began her morning routine, sweeping ashes, laying kindling, humming the tune that settled the room. But today her song felt fragile, like spun glass that might shatter if she breathed too hard. "How's Jonah?" she asked, breathing steady. "Fever's broke." Eliza glanced toward the back room. "He'll live, though what kind of life?" She didn't finish the sentence. Heavy boots on the porch announced Graves's arrival. He entered without knocking, as always, but today he brought 2 men with him, strangers with hard faces and calculating eyes. "Morning, Eliza," Graves said with false cheer. "Like you to meet Mr. Brennan and Mr. Cobb. They deal in agricultural commodities." The slave traders. Lila's blood went cold. She kept sweeping, keeping her face blank while her mind raced. "Gentlemen," Eliza said stiffly, "I wasn't expecting visitors." "Graves tells us you might have some surplus inventory," Brennan said, pulling out a leather folder. "We're prepared to offer fair market prices, cash on delivery." "I have no surplus." Cobb smiled, but it was all teeth and no warmth. "Everyone's got surplus when the price is right. We're talking about reducing your overhead, ma'am. Converting unproductive assets to working capital." Unproductive assets. They meant people. Lila's hands tightened on the broom handle. "My household is not for sale," Eliza said clearly. Graves stepped forward. "Now, Eliza, let's not be hasty. These gentlemen have come a long way, and your creditors won't wait much longer." He gestured toward the back room. "That boy, Jonah, for instance. Strong back, good teeth. He'd bring top dollar in Natchez. Jonah stays here. Jonah goes where the bills say he goes." Graves's voice hardened. "Unless you've got another way to raise $800 by month's end." $800. Lila had never heard of so much money in her life. It might as well have been 8,000 or 8 million. Brennan opened his folder and spread papers across the table, pushing Eliza's ledger aside. "Bill of sale forms, transport permits, all legal and proper." He tapped the papers with a stubby finger. "Sign here, and your money troubles disappear." Eliza stared at the papers as if they were poisonous snakes. Around the kitchen, work had stopped. Mama Ruth stood frozen at her stove. Lila held her breath. "I need time to think," Eliza said finally. "Time's a luxury you can't afford," Graves replied. "But I'll give you until noon. After that, decisions get made for you." The traders gathered their papers and left with promises to return. Graves lingered in the doorway. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," he said to Eliza. "Boy's just property, property that can solve your problems." When they were gone, the kitchen fell into heavy silence. Eliza put her face in her hands. Mama Ruth resumed her, stirring with mechanical motions. Lila looked toward the parlor, where the Bible waited with its hidden secrets. "I need to check something," Lila whispered to Mama Ruth. Her mother nodded without looking up. "Be careful, child." The Bible lay closed on the mahogany desk, its leather cover dark in the morning light. Lila approached it like a sacred thing, which it was both holy book and hiding place for dangerous truths. She opened it carefully to the page she remembered and found the margin again. In daylight, the cramped writing was clearer. She traced each word with her fingertip, committing every detail to memory. Jonah Freeman Manumission granted this 15th day of March, 1848, upon condition of proper seal and witnessed by Office of County Probate Clerk, Whitcomb papers to be held in trust until presentation, valid upon green seal. This testament by James Harrow, signed before God. Lila's heart hammered. Jonah Freeman. Not Jonah the slave, but Jonah Freeman. The name itself was a promise, a doorway to a different life. But 1848 was 3 years past. Eliza's father had been alive then. James Harrow had freed Jonah in secret, hiding the promise in the Bible's margins, where only the faithful would find it. County Probate Clerk Whitcomb, green seal. These were the keys to unlock Jonah's freedom if they could reach the courthouse before Graves and his traders made their move. "Child, what you doing?" Lila jumped. Nettie stood in the parlor doorway, arms crossed, face concerned. I was. Lila couldn't find words that wouldn't sound like madness. Nettie stepped closer and looked down at the open Bible. Her eyes found the margin, read the cramped words, and her face went pale. "Sweet Lord," she whispered, "how long has this been here?" "I don't know. 3 years, maybe more. Nettie glanced toward the kitchen, then back at Lila. Does she know, Miss Eliza? I don't think so. She would have said something, wouldn't she? Would she? Nettie's voice was thoughtful. Her daddy was a complicated man, kept lots of secrets. Maybe he meant for this to stay hidden until when? Until the right time, until someone with courage enough to act on it came along. They stared at each other across the open book. Lila saw her own fear and hope reflected in Nettie's dark eyes. We have to tell her, Lila said. Do we? Or do we act on it ourselves? Nettie's jaw set with determination. Miss Eliza's got enough burden without this. But Jonah's got the right to know he's already free. How do we get to the courthouse? Graves is watching everything. Nettie smiled, and for the first time it reached her eyes. Child, I've been walking these roads since before you were born. And I know folks who remember when this county was different. Folks who believe in right and wrong. Footsteps in the hall sent them both into motion. Nettie closed the Bible while Lila grabbed a dust cloth from the side table. When Eliza appeared in the doorway, they were both busy with cleaning. Have either of you seen my father's survey maps? Eliza asked. I thought I might have land to sell, instead of... She didn't finish, but they all knew what she meant. Survey maps are in the chest upstairs, Nettie said. I'll fetch them for you. Eliza nodded and left. Nettie waited until her footsteps faded, then looked at Lila with new intensity. Tonight, she whispered. After the house sleeps, can you get to the quarters without being seen? Yes, do it. Find Jonah. Tell him what you found. Then we'll see what courage looks like when it has to walk in darkness. The quarters settled into nighttime quiet as Lila slipped from the kitchen door. No moon showed through the clouds, which made moving dangerous but also hidden. She felt her way along the familiar path, past the chicken coops and tool shed, toward the row of cabins where the field hands lived. Light flickered in one window, Jonah's cabin, where he was recovering from his river ordeal. Lila crept closer and tapped 3 times on the doorframe, soft as settling birds. Come in, child. Jonah sat on a wooden chair by the fireplace, looking stronger than he had that morning, but still hollow-eyed from his brush with drowning. He wore clean clothes that Mama Ruth had sent over, and his breathing was easy now. How you feeling? Lila asked. Like the good Lord gave me another day I didn't earn. Jonah gestured to a second chair. What brings you out in the dark? Dangerous time for walking. Lila sat down and looked into his kind face. I found something, in the big house Bible, about you. His expression sharpened. About me? Your name, written in the margin, with words about freedom. Silence stretched between them. Outside, night birds called across the cotton fields and the river murmured its ancient songs. Tell me exactly what you saw, Jonah said finally. Lila recited the words she'd memorized. Jonah Freeman Manumission granted this 15th day of March, 1848, upon condition of proper seal and witness by office of County Probate Clerk, Whitcomb Papers, to be held in trust until presentation, valid upon green seal. This testament by James Harrow, signed before God. Jonah's hands gripped the arms of his chair. James Harrow, Miss Eliza's father. You knew him? Worked for him since I was younger than you. He was different, kinder, had ideas that didn't sit well with some folks. Jonah's voice grew thoughtful. Spring of 48, he called me to his study. Said he had plans for me, but the timing wasn't right yet. Said I'd know when the time came. The time's come, Lila said urgently. Graves is selling you to traders tomorrow unless Miss Eliza finds money she doesn't have. Jonah nodded slowly. Figured as much. But how do we get to this clerk? Even if the papers are real, courthouse is 2 days' ride through country full of patrollers and questions. Nettie knows people. Folks who remember when things were different. Underground Railroad folks. She didn't say that exactly, but didn't have to. Jonah smiled grimly. Your Nettie's got courage, and courage talks to courage. He stood and paced to the window, looking out into the darkness. Question is, do we tell Miss Eliza? She's carrying so much already. Maybe we should. No, Jonah's voice was firm. This ain't just about my freedom. It's about her father's wishes, his promises. She has the right to know what kind of man he really was. A sound outside made them both freeze, footsteps on the path, coming closer. Lila blew out the candle and they waited in darkness. 3 soft taps on the doorframe, their signal. "It's me," Nettie's voice, barely a whisper. She slipped inside, and Jonah relit the candle. Nettie carried a canvas sack over her shoulder and moved with the quiet purpose of someone who'd walked dangerous paths before. "Told Miss Eliza about the margin writing," she said, without preamble. "Had to. She deserved to know." "How'd she take it?" Jonah asked. "Like a woman finding out her father kept the biggest secret of his life from her." Nettie set down her sack. She's in the parlor now, reading that margin over and over, crying some, praying more. And, she said to tell you 2 things. First, she's sorry she never knew. Second, she's going to make it right. Lila felt hope flutter in her chest like a caged bird testing its wings. "How?" Jonah asked. Nettie smiled and opened her canvas sack. Inside were traveling clothes, a water jug, hard biscuits wrapped in cloth, and something else, a small book with worn covers. "Hymnal," she said, handing it to Lila. "But not just any hymnal. This one belonged to my grandmother. She used to say the songs were maps for folks who couldn't read regular maps." Lila opened the book. The pages were filled with familiar hymns, but now she looked closer. In the margins, someone had drawn tiny symbols, crosses at river crossings, stars near safe houses, arrows pointing toward freedom. "Every verse tells you which way to go," Nettie explained. "Follow the drinking gourd, follow the river, follow the kindness of strangers who know the signal songs. We leave tonight, before dawn. Miss Eliza's saddling horses and packing supplies. Said her father's promise is going to see daylight even if it kills her." Jonah shook his head. "Too dangerous for her. Let me and Lila go alone." "Try telling her that." Nettie laughed softly. "Woman's got her mind made up. Besides, she's the legal owner of the Bible. Clerk won't listen to a slave child and a runaway. But he'll listen to her. And if we get caught, we get caught trying to honor a dead man's word." Nettie's voice was steel wrapped in velvet. "That's worth the risk." Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten in the east. Soon the plantation would wake, and their chance would be gone. "Get ready," Nettie said. "Dawn's coming, and freedom's waiting somewhere down the road." They gathered in, the pre-dawn darkness behind the kitchen, 3 unlikely travelers bound together by hope and desperation. Eliza wore her plainest dress and a dark shawl that would help her blend into shadows. Jonah carried a walking stick and the papers Nettie had forged giving him permission to travel with his mistress. Lila clutched the hymnal like a compass, its margin maps the only guide they had to safe passage. "Horses are saddled," Eliza whispered. "Food and water packed. I told Mama Ruth we're visiting my cousin in Clinton, should buy us 2 days before anyone asks hard questions." "And Graves?" Jonah asked. "Thinks I'm considering his offer. Told him I needed time to pray about it." Eliza's mouth quirked in a bitter smile. "Wasn't lying about the praying part." They led the horses quietly down the lane, away from the sleeping quarters and the overseer's cabin. The morning star hung low in the eastern sky, and fog rose off the river like the breath of sleeping giants. Once they reached the main road, they mounted and set off toward the interior, away from the river routes that patrollers watched, toward the network of back roads and friendly faces that the hymnal mapped in song and symbol. Lila rode behind Eliza, the hymnal open in her lap. The first song was "Wade in the Water," and the margin notes showed a path to the creek ford where the Quaker miller lived. From there, "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot" would guide them to the preacher's cabin, and "Follow the Drinking Gourd" would take them the rest of the way to town. As they rode, Lila hummed the melodies softly. The songs seemed to flow into each other like streams joining a river, creating a musical map that had guided other travelers toward freedom in darker times. "Your grandmother was a wise woman," Eliza said, listening to Lila's quiet singing. "Wisdom born of necessity," Jonah replied. "When the law's against you, you find other laws to follow. Older laws, deeper ones." The sun rose slowly, painting the sky in shades of hope and worry. Behind them, the plantation would soon wake to find them gone. Ahead, somewhere beyond the rolling hills and hidden valleys, lay the courthouse where truth waited to be spoken in daylight. But between here and there stretched a road full of dangers they couldn't imagine, watched by eyes they couldn't see, measured by a justice they couldn't trust. Lila touched her ribbon and tapped 3 times. Once for courage, once for hope, once for the song that would carry them home. The creek ford appeared through morning mist, exactly where the hymnal promised shallow water running clear over smooth stones, with a mill wheel turning lazy circles in the current. The Quaker miller, Samuel Coffin, stood in his doorway as if he'd been expecting them, flour dust on his dark clothes and kindness in his weathered face. "Friends," he said simply, the traditional Quaker greeting that carried more weight than its single word suggested. "We're seeking passage to town," Eliza said carefully. "We have urgent business with the probate clerk." Samuel nodded, his eyes taking in their small party with understanding that came from years of reading danger in desperate faces. "The road is watched today. Patrollers passed not an hour ago, asking questions about runaways." Lila felt her stomach drop. "What kind of questions?" "About a field hand and a kitchen girl traveling with a woman of quality." Samuel's gaze found Jonah. "Seems your overseer has raised alarm about stolen property." "Jonah's not stolen," Eliza said firmly. "He's a free man. We have papers to prove it." "Papers are one thing, proving them in daylight is another." Samuel gestured toward his mill. "Come inside. Rest your horses. The road will be safer come evening." They watered their mounts and followed Samuel into the cool dimness of the mill. Flour sacks stood in neat rows, and the great stone wheels turned with ancient rhythm. But it was what Samuel showed them behind a false wall that made Lila's heart leap. A hidden room, with quilts, food, and maps drawn on the wooden walls. "How many people have passed through here?" Eliza asked, staring at the secret chamber. "More than I can count." "Less than I'd hoped." Samuel spread a hand-drawn map across a wooden table. "Your overseer's got help now. 3 men with dogs, riding the main roads. But there's another way." His finger traced a path that wound through swampland and over ridges, following waterways where dogs couldn't track scent. It would take longer, but it might get them to town alive. "The church at Miller's Creek," Samuel pointed to a symbol on the map. "Pastor Ames will shelter you for the night. From there, it's half a day to the courthouse." Lila opened the hymnal and compared its margin maps to Samuel's drawings. The routes matched perfectly, waterways marked with crosses, safe houses marked with stars, dangerous crossings marked with warnings written in musical notation. "The songs are true," she whispered. "Songs carry truth when words can't," Samuel agreed. "Your grandmother knew that." They rested through the heat of midday, sharing cornbread and planning their evening journey. As shadows lengthened, Samuel brought troubling news. Patrollers stopped at the Jackson place, found tracks leading toward the swamp road. He met Eliza's eyes grimly. "They know which way you've gone." "How much time do we have?" Jonah asked. "Maybe till sunset, maybe less." Eliza stood and paced the small room. "We could turn back, return to the plantation, and face whatever consequences." "No," Jonah said quietly. "Your father made a promise, wrote it in God's own book. That promise deserves to see daylight, even if it costs us everything? Especially then." Lila looked between them, seeing the weight of decision settling on Eliza's shoulders. Through the small window, she could see storm clouds building in the western sky, another trial to add to their growing list. "We go on," Eliza said finally. "God help us, we go on." They left the mill as evening fell, following deer paths through cypress swamp, where Spanish moss hung like prayers from ancient trees. The going was slow, horses stepping careful through boggy ground, while night sounds rose around them like a living symphony. Lila kept the hymnal open in the fading light, humming navigation songs that seemed to call back to nightbirds and whippoorwills. The melody of "Steal Away" echoed through the trees, answered by owl calls that sounded almost human. "Listen," Jonah said softly. In the distance, dogs were barking, not the random sound of farm animals, but the focused baying of hounds on a trail. "They've found our scent," Eliza whispered. Samuel had warned them about this stretch open ground between 2 creeks where tracks would show clear in the mud. But he'd also shown them something else on his map, a symbol that looked like a lantern with arrows pointing in different directions. "There," Lila pointed ahead. "The signal tree." A massive oak stood alone in the clearing, its trunk scarred by lightning but still strong. Hanging from its lowest branch was a lantern that flickered with coded light, 3 flashes. Pause, 2 flashes, pause, 3 again. "Someone's helping us," Eliza breathed. They rode toward the tree as the dog sounds grew closer. The lantern's pattern changed rapid flashes now, urgent warnings. From the swamp behind them came the splash of horses and the shouts of men. "This way," a voice called from the darkness. A figure emerged from behind the oak, a small woman in dark clothing with a medicine bag slung across her shoulder. Lila recognized her from market days, Essie the midwife, who delivered babies and tended the sick for both white and colored families. "Miss Eliza?" "Child, what are you doing out here with the patrollers hunting?" "Following my father's wishes," Eliza said. "Essie, we need help." The midwife took in their situation with practiced eyes. "Dogs will be here in minutes. Can't outrun them in open ground." She gestured toward a cypress brake. "But there's another way. The creek, under the creek." Essie smiled grimly. "Old Beaver Dam creates a tunnel. Water's shallow, air pocket above. Dogs lose the scent in running water." It sounded impossible, but as the hounds grew closer, impossible began to look like their only choice. "Can the horses make it?" Jonah asked. "Not the horses. We go on foot from here." Essie shouldered her medicine bag. "Turn them loose. They'll find their way home eventually." They stripped the horses of saddles and supplies, keeping only what they could carry. The animals trotted off into the swamp, taking their betraying scent with them. "Follow me," Essie said. "Stay quiet. Trust the water." She led them to where the creek narrowed between cypress roots. What had looked like solid bank was actually a hollow space behind a curtain of hanging moss. The water was knee-deep and surprisingly warm. "Single file," Essie whispered. "Feel your way. There's air above, but keep low." They waded into darkness, hands on the shoulders of the person ahead, feet feeling for solid bottom. The water gurgled around them, masking any sound they might make. Above their heads, roots formed a natural roof with just enough space to breathe. Behind them, dog sounds reached the clearing. Barking, sniffing, the sound of men dismounting and searching. But the scent trail ended at the water's edge, and even the best hounds couldn't follow what the creek had washed away. "Lost 'em at the creek," a voice carried over the water. "Trail goes cold here. Circle back," another man ordered. "Check the mill again. Maybe they doubled back." Gradually, the sounds faded, but Essie made them wait in the tunnel until full dark before emerging on the far side of the creek, muddy and exhausted, but free. "The church is 2 miles, she said, wringing water from her skirts. "Pastor Ames is expecting you." "How could he be expecting us?" Essie smiled. "News travels fast when it travels by faithful hands. Your Samuel Coffin sent word ahead." She handed Lila a small bundle wrapped in oiled cloth. "Dry clothes for the child. Can't have her catching fever." They walked through the night forest, guided by Essie's sure knowledge of paths invisible to inexperienced eyes. The hymnal's margin maps proved true again, stars marking safe passage, crosses showing where streams could be forded, arrows pointing toward sanctuary. As they walked, Lila hummed, "Swing low, sweet chariot," the notes floating soft through cypress branches. The song seemed to call to something deep in the swampland, and she could have sworn she heard voices humming back the ghosts of other travelers who'd walked this road toward freedom. "Almost there," Essie said as church bells tolled midnight in the distance. "Pastor Ames keeps coffee on for late visitors." Through the trees ahead, lamplight flickered warm and welcoming. They'd made it through the first test of waters. But ahead lay trials that would test more than their courage. They would test the very meaning of justice in a world where law and righteousness didn't always walk together. Miller's Creek Baptist Church sat in a grove of old oaks like a ship anchored in a peaceful harbor. Light glowed in the windows, and smoke rose from the chimney of the small parsonage beside it. Pastor Amos appeared in the doorway before they reached the porch steps, as if he'd been watching the road all night. Come in," he said warmly, ushering them into the small parlor. "Essie, you brought them safe." "Safe, as I could manage." The midwife settled wearily into a rocking chair. "Patrollers are thick as mosquitoes tonight." Pastor Amos was a small man with silver hair and eyes that held both kindness and steel. He moved around the room with quiet efficiency, pouring coffee and setting out plates of corn, bread, and cold chicken. "Eat first," he said. "Questions after." The Lord knows a body can't think proper on an empty stomach. They ate in grateful silence, while rain began pattering on the roof, the storm that had been building all day, finally arriving to wash their tracks clean. Lila wrapped her hands around the warm coffee cup and felt her courage slowly returning. "Now then," Pastor Amos said when they'd finished eating, "Essie tells me you're seeking justice at the courthouse." Eliza nodded and pulled the folded Bible page from her coat, a copy Nettie had made of the margin writing. "My father freed this man 3 years ago, wrote the manumission in our family Bible, but the papers were never filed proper." Pastor Amos examined the writing carefully, his lips moving as he read. "Probate Clark Whitcomb. Yes, I know him. Honest man, if he's still alive. Been clerk for 20 years. Still alive?" Jonah asked. "Getting on in years. Sometimes sends his nephew to handle routine business." Pastor Amos looked troubled. "If this is genuine, and I believe it is, then you've got legal ground to stand on. But proving it in court with half the county looking for you. What choice do we have?" Eliza asked. "You could wait, hide until the trouble passes, file the papers when things settle down. And how long might that be?" Pastor Amos met her eyes honestly. "Might be never, might be your whole life." Silence settled over the small room. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, and rain drummed harder on the roof. Lila touched her ribbon and thought about all the songs in the hymnal melodies that had guided desperate people toward uncertain freedom for generations. "Pastor," she said quietly, "what does your Bible say about waiting?" The old man smiled. "Child, my Bible says many things about waiting, but it says even more about acting when the time is right." He gestured toward the window, where lightning flickered. "This storm will clear the roads of patrollers. Come morning, you'll have a clean run to town. And then you stand in the courthouse and speak truth to power. Let the law decide what the law will do." Essie leaned forward in her rocking chair. "Amos, you got that wagon still? The one with the false bottom?" "I do. Might be safer than walking. Less conspicuous than 3 folks afoot on the main road." Pastor Amos nodded slowly. "Could work. Old wagon, tired mule, family heading to market. Nothing suspicious in that. Except for the part where 2 of us aren't supposed to be free," Jonah pointed out. "Details." Essie waved her hand. "I got papers for you, both of you." She pulled documents from her medicine bag. "Bills of sale showing you as freeborn, hired workers, made them myself." Eliza stared at the forged papers. "Essie, you could hang for making these. Could hang for delivering babies to slave women too, if the wrong folks decided to make an issue of it." Essie's voice was matter of fact. "Sometimes, doing right means taking chances." Pastor Amos stood and walked to the window, looking out at the storm. "I'll drive you to town myself. Old preacher taking his workers to market, nobody questions a man of God about his business." "Are you certain?" "Child, I've been preaching about justice for 30 years. About time I stopped just talking about it." They spent the rest of the night in the church basement, sleeping on quilts, while rain washed the countryside clean. Lila dreamed of music hymns that rose like ladders toward heaven, carrying voices of all the people who'd walked dangerous roads toward freedom. She woke to the sound of birds singing and sunlight streaming through high windows. The storm had passed, leaving the air fresh and full of possibilities. "Time to go," Pastor Amos called down the stairs. Wagons loaded and the mules ready for traveling. They climbed up into the morning light to find an ordinary farm wagon loaded with ordinary supplies, sacks of grain, baskets of vegetables, everything needed to explain their presence on the road to town. Hidden beneath a false floor lay the real cargo, hope written in faded ink on a Bible page. "Courthouse opens at 9, Pastor Amos said as they settled into the wagon bed. "Clerk Whitcomb's usually there early, checking records and such. And if he's not there, then we wait, or find his nephew, or make such a fuss that somebody has to listen." Essie handed Lila a small bottle of clear liquid. "Peppermint oil, few drops on your tongue if you feel faint. Steadies the nerves." The wagon wheels creaked as they rolled out of the churchyard and onto the main road. Ahead lay the county seat, where justice waited behind courthouse doors. Behind them lay everything they'd known, plantation life, familiar routines, the terrible certainty of slavery. Lila opened the hymnal one more time and found the song for this moment. "We Shall Overcome." She hummed it quietly as the wagon rolled toward town, letting the melody rise and fall like prayer, like promise, like the beating of a heart determined to keep beating until freedom came. The courthouse sat at the center of town like a temple to earthly justice, white columns reaching toward heaven, broad steps where truth and lies came to be judged. By 9 o'clock on a clear morning, townsfolk had begun gathering for the weekly market, their voices mixing with the sound of wagon wheels and horses' hooves on cobblestone. Pastor Amos drove their wagon to the hitching post beside the courthouse steps. "Remember," he said quietly, "you're my hired hands, here on church business. Act natural. Speak respectful. Let the papers do their talking." They climbed down from the wagon bed, Lila clutching the hymnal, while Eliza carried the precious Bible copy in her reticule. Jonah walked beside them, wearing the freedom papers Essie had forged, trying to look like a man who belonged in daylight instead of one who'd spent his life in shadows. The courthouse doors stood open, revealing a cool hallway that smelled of ink and old leather. A sign pointed toward the probate office, a small room lined with ledgers and filing cabinets where County Clerk Whitcomb sat behind a desk covered with ribboned documents. He was older than Lila had expected, with white hair and spectacles perched on his nose, but his eyes were sharp as he looked up from his morning paperwork. "Pastor Amos," he said with genuine warmth, "don't often see you in town on a weekday. What brings you to our halls of official business?" "A matter of some delicacy, Brother Whitcomb," Pastor Amos gestured toward Eliza. "This lady has found some papers that might interest your office." Clerk Whitcomb stood and bowed politely. "Madam, how may I be of service?" Eliza stepped forward, her back straight and her voice steady. "My name is Eliza Harrow. I believe you knew my father, James Harrow." "Indeed I did. Good man, your father. Dealt with him on several occasions before his passing." The clerk's expression grew curious. "What papers have you found?" "These." Eliza placed the Bible copy on his desk. Clerk Whitcomb put on his spectacles and bent to read the cramped writing. His eyebrows rose as he took in the words, "Manumission, March 15th, 1848. He looked up sharply. "This appears to be your father's handwriting." "It is. And this man, Jonah, where is he now?" Jonah stepped forward. "Here, sir. I'm Jonah." Clerk Whitcomb studied him carefully. "You've been enslaved all this time, not knowing about this document?" "Hidden in the Bible margin, sir. We only found it yesterday." The clerk sat back in his chair, fingers drumming on the desk. "This is irregular. Manumission papers should have been filed immediately upon writing. The delay raises questions of authenticity." Lila's heart sank. Was all their courage going to crumble on a technicality? However, Clerk Whitcomb continued, "I remember your father well, Miss Harrow. He spoke to me several times about his intentions regarding certain members of his household. I always wondered why he never followed through." "What do you mean?" "He came here in March of '48, asking about proper procedures for manumission. Said he had a man who'd earned his freedom. I explained the process papers to be filed, seals to be affixed, witnesses to be recorded." The clerk's eyes grew distant with memory. "He left saying he'd return with the documents. Never did. Until now," Eliza said softly. "Until now." Clerk Whitcomb picked up the Bible copy again. "The wording is correct, the legal language proper, and I do remember your father's distinctive handwriting." He looked at Jonah. "You said your name was Jonah. What's your family name?" Jonah hesitated, then answered with quiet dignity. "Freeman, sir. Jonah Freeman." Clerk Whitcomb smiled. "Appropriate name for a free man." He pulled open a desk drawer. "Let me get the proper forms. We'll need to verify this document against the original, of course." "The original Bible is back at the plantation," Eliza said. "Then we'll need someone to fetch it. Can't process manumission papers without examining the source document." Footsteps echoed in the courthouse hallway, heavy boots that made Lila's blood freeze. Through the office door strode Overseer Graves, followed by the two slave traders from the day before. Behind them came Sheriff Briggs, his hand resting on his pistol butt. "Well, well," Graves said with satisfaction. "Found our runaways." "These people aren't runaways," Pastor Amos said firmly. "They're here on legitimate business." Sheriff Briggs looked confused. "Graves here says this woman stole valuable property from his plantation. Says she's harboring runaway slaves." "That's a lie," Eliza said, her voice ringing clear. "Jonah is no one's property. He's a free man." Graves laughed harshly. "Free man? Boy's been my field hand for 3 years. Got papers proving ownership right here." He pulled documents from his coat bills of sale with official seals. "Those papers are false," Clerk Whitcomb said, standing behind his desk. "This man was freed in 1848 by James Harrow. I have the manumission document." "You have a piece of paper with some writing on it," Graves replied. "Could be forged. Could be anything." He gestured to the traders. "These gentlemen have money invested in livestock. They expect delivery of what they paid for." "No money has changed hands," Eliza said. "I never agreed to sell anyone. Debts got called in." Graves pulled out more papers. Creditors took ownership of chattels to satisfy outstanding obligations, legal and proper. Sheriff Briggs looked between the competing sets of documents like a man watching a tennis match. "This is getting mighty complicated. Maybe we should sort this out at the jail." "Sheriff," Clerk Whitcomb said with authority, "these people are conducting legitimate business in my office. Unless you have warrants, I suggest you let them finish." "We got warrants," one of the traders said, producing a rolled paper. "Recovery of stolen property." Signed by Judge Morrison himself. Lila watched the legal battle unfold like watching a flood rise around them. Papers flew back and forth, each side claiming law on their side. But law, she was learning, could be twisted to serve whoever had the most money and the loudest voice. "Enough," Graves said finally. "Sheriff, arrest the woman for theft and the boy for running. We'll sort out the paperwork later." "Wait," Lila said, her young voice cutting through the adult argument like a bell through thunder. Everyone turned to look at her. She stepped forward, the hymnal clutched in her hands, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "Mr. Clark, sir, what color seal did Mr. James Harrow use for his official papers?" Clerk Whitcomb blinked, surprised by the question. "Green wax, with a ring impression. Had a distinctive notch where his signet, ring, was damaged." Lila nodded and looked at Graves. "Show them the seal on your papers." Graves hesitated, then handed over his documents. The clerk examined them carefully. "Blue wax," he announced. "No ring impression. Standard courthouse seal." He looked up sharply. "These weren't signed by James Harrow." "Course not," Graves blustered. "They're creditor papers." "From the bank." "Then why do they claim to be bills of sale from James Harrow to you?" The clerk's voice was cold now. "That would be forgery, Mr. Graves." The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the wall clock. Graves looked trapped, his face reddening with anger and fear. "Papers can be wrong," he said desperately. "But the boy's still property. Been working my fields for 3 years." "Working your fields as a free man," Eliza said. "My father freed him. We have proof. You have a scrap of paper that could say anything. Then, let's get the original," Clerk Whitcomb said decisively. He turned to Sheriff Briggs. "Sheriff, I'm requesting your assistance in recovering evidence. We need to examine the Harrow family Bible." "That's private property," Graves protested. "It's evidence in a legal proceeding. Sheriff, will you send men to fetch it?" Sheriff Briggs nodded slowly. "I'll send my deputy. Should be back by noon." They waited in the courthouse parlor while the morning stretched toward midday. Townspeople had begun to gather, drawn by word of the unusual proceedings. Lila sat beside Pastor Amos, the hymnal open in her lap, humming softly to calm her nerves. Through the window, she could see Graves pacing on the courthouse steps, arguing with the slave traders. Their voices carried through the glass angry words about money lost and plans ruined. "Child," Pastor Amos said quietly, "that was quick thinking about the seal color." "My grandmother always said details matter," Lila replied. "Truth is in the small things that liars forget to change." Eliza sat across from them, her face pale but determined. "I keep thinking about my father. Why did he hide the manumission instead of filing it proper?" "Maybe he was waiting for the right time," Pastor Amos suggested. 1848 was a troubled year. Lot of folks with strong opinions about slavery were having to keep quiet. "Or maybe," Lila said softly, "he knew someday it would need to be found by someone brave enough to act on it." Hoofbeats on cobblestone announced the deputy's return. He dismounted and climbed the courthouse steps, carrying a familiar leather-bound book. The Harrow family Bible, retrieved from the plantation parlor where Lila had first discovered its secret. Clerk Whitcomb received the Bible with reverent hands. Heavy book, lot of history in something like this. He opened it carefully, turning pages until he found the margin writing. In the natural light from the courthouse windows, the cramped ink stood out clearly against the ancient paper. "There it is," he said softly. "James." Harrow's distinctive hand. The date, the conditions, the legal language. He looked up at the gathered crowd. "Gentlemen, this is a valid manumission document, written in a Bible margin," Graves protested. "Not proper legal papers. Legal papers can be written anywhere, as long as they contain the required elements. Grantor, grantee, consideration, conditions, and witness." Clerk Whitcomb counted off on his fingers. "This document has them all." He opened his desk drawer and withdrew a small wooden box. Inside, nestled in silk, lay an ornate seal ring and several sticks of colored wax. "James Harrow's seal," he explained, "kept here for authenticating his papers after his death." He held up a green wax stick. "This is what he used for all his official documents." The clerk lit a small candle and warmed the green wax until it melted. Then he pressed the seal ring into the soft surface, leaving a clear impression with a distinctive crescent notch. "Perfect match to the description in the Bible," he announced. "Jonah Freeman, by the authority vested in me by this county and this state, I hereby declare you a free man under the manumission granted by James Harrow on March 15th, 1848. The words hung in the air like a benediction. Lila felt tears of joy stinging her eyes as she watched Jonah's face transform the weight of slavery, lifting from his shoulders like morning fog burning off in sunlight. "This is outrageous," Graves sputtered. "I demand an appeal. I demand—" "You demand nothing," Sheriff Briggs said firmly. "You presented forged documents claiming ownership of a free man. That's a felony in this state. The slave traders were already backing toward the door, their investment suddenly worth less than nothing." Papers rustled as they gathered their fake bills of sale and prepared to retreat. "Wait," Clerk Whitcomb called to them. "You gentlemen paid money for fraudulent goods. I suggest you speak to a lawyer about recovering your losses from Mr. Graves." Graves's face went white. "Now hold on nothing," one of the traders snarled. "You sold us a free man. Our money back, plus damages." They converged on Graves like wolves on a wounded deer. Lila almost felt sorry for him as they demanded compensation for their wasted journey and false promises. Sheriff Briggs stepped between them. "Take your business outside. This is a courthouse, not a market." As the arguing parties filed out, Clerk Whitcomb turned back to his paperwork. "Now then, we need to make this official. Jonah Freeman, do you have a surname preference for your freedom papers?" "Freeman suits me fine, sir. Freeman it is." The clerk began writing on official forms proper manumission papers that would serve as proof of freedom anywhere in the country. "Miss Harrow, you'll need to sign as heir to your father's estate." Eliza took the pen and signed her name with a steady hand. "My father would be proud. I believe he would." Clerk Whitcomb affixed his seal to the completed documents. "Jonah Freeman, you are hereby and officially declared a free man with all rights and privileges pertaining thereto." A small cheer went up from the townspeople who had gathered to witness the proceeding. Even Sheriff Briggs smiled as he shook Jonah's hand. "Congratulations, Mr. Freeman." Mr. Freeman. The title sat on Jonah's shoulders like a well-fitted coat. He stood straighter, breathed deeper, carried himself like a man who owned his own name. "What happens now?" Eliza asked. "Now you go home," Clerk Whitcomb said, "though I suspect home might look different than it did yesterday." The courthouse steps blazed with midday sun as they emerged with freedom papers tucked safely in Jonah's pocket. Word had spread through town, and a crowd had gathered, some supportive, others skeptical, all curious about the morning's dramatic proceedings. Lila stood between Eliza and Jonah, still holding the hymnal that had guided their journey. The songs inside seemed different now, not maps to freedom, but celebration hymns for freedom found. "Mrs. Harrow," a voice called from the crowd. They turned to see the three matrons from the ferry landing, the same women who had cornered Eliza with their questions about proper standards and social boundaries. "Missus," Whitmore approached with careful steps, her face unreadable. "We heard about the legal proceedings." "Yes?" Eliza's voice was wary. "We came to apologize." The words fell into silence like stones into still water. Lila watched the matrons struggle with their changed understanding of the world. "Your father was a man of conscience, Mrs. Foster said quietly. "We didn't know." Few people did, Eliza replied. He kept his convictions private. And you, Mrs.? Caldwell asked. What are your convictions? Eliza looked at Jonah, then at Lila, then back at the women who had once been her judges. I said I'd never kiss a slave, she said clearly, her voice carrying across the courthouse steps. I want to correct that statement. The crowd quieted, sensing the importance of the moment. I said I'd never kiss a slave. I was right. Eliza stepped closer to Jonah, her eyes meeting his with new understanding. I will only ever kiss a free man. She reached up and pressed her lips gently to Jonah's forehead once, then again a blessing and benediction that declared to everyone watching that mercy was stronger than law and love was stronger than fear. The gesture rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. Some nodded approval, others frowned confusion. A few wiped tears from their eyes. But from somewhere in the gathered people, a voice began to sing. Lila recognized the melody immediately. It was Amazing Grace, the hymn that spoke of being lost and found, blind and made to see. More voices joined the song. Pastor Amos's rich baritone, Essie's alto harmony, even some of the townspeople who had come as spectators. The music rose from the courthouse steps and spread through the town square, carrying news that grace could still be found in the most unlikely places. Lila opened the hymnal and added her pure soprano to the chorus. Her voice soared above the others, clear as church bells, steady as river current, carrying the melody that had guided them all toward this moment of truth revealed in daylight. As the hymn reached its final verse, Clark Whitcomb appeared in the courthouse doorway. He held a final document elaborately written and sealed with green wax. Miss Harrow, he called, one more paper for your consideration. They approached the courthouse steps as the singing faded to respectful silence. What's this? Eliza asked. A suggestion based on the morning's proceedings. Clerk Whitcomb unrolled the document. A household charter establishing wages for Mr. Freeman, defining terms of employment for any other workers you might choose to hire, and guaranteeing that no person under your roof will ever be sold against their will. Eliza read the charter carefully, her eyes widening. You wrote this just now? Legal documents are my specialty, the clerk smiled. All it needs is your signature to make it binding. Without hesitation, Eliza took the offered pen and signed her name. Clerk Whitcomb added his seal, then handed copies to both Eliza and Jonah. Now it's official, he announced to the crowd. The Harrow plantation operates under new principles as of this day. Sheriff Briggs stepped forward. I'll post notice that any interference with these arrangements will be met with the full force of the law. As the crowd began to disperse, Pastor Amos brought the wagon around. Time to go home, he said, though home's going to be a different place than when you left it. They climbed into the wagon bed, exhausted but victorious. As Pastor Amos clicked the reins and the mule began its steady walk out of town, Lila looked back at the courthouse where truth had finally found its voice. The hymnal lay open in her lap to the final song of their journey, When the Roll is Called Up, Yonder. She hummed the melody softly as they rolled toward home, letting the notes carry their gratitude up to whatever powers had guided them through the darkness toward light. Behind them, the courthouse bell tolled noon, marking the hour when freedom papers were signed and justice was done. Ahead lay a plantation where former slaves would work for wages, where children would learn letters, where the line between us and them had been erased by courage and rewritten in love. Evening light pooled on the plantation porch like warm honey as they returned home. The journey that had begun in desperate flight now ended in quiet triumph. 3 travelers who had left as strangers and returned as family. Mama Ruth stood in the kitchen doorway, flour on her hands and tears of relief in her eyes. Thank the Lord, she whispered, embracing Leela tight enough to lift her from the ground. Thank the Lord you're safe. Nettie appeared beside her, followed by other household members who had waited through the long day wondering if their brave friends would ever come home. It's done, Eliza said simply. Jonah is free, legal and proper. The news spread through the plantation like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. Field hands gathered in the yard, house servants filled the porch, children peeked from behind their mothers' skirts. All of them watched Jonah Freeman, the man who had left as property and returned as a person. Show them, Lila whispered. Jonah pulled the freedom papers from his pocket and held them up to catch the last of the day's light. The green wax seal gleamed like a jewel, proof that justice could still be found when brave people demanded it. "These papers say I'm free," Jonah announced. "But more than that, they say, we all got choices now. Choices about how we live, how we work, how we treat each other." Eliza stepped forward. "Tomorrow, things change. Wages instead of whips, learning instead of ignorance, respect instead of fear." She gestured toward the charter in her hand. "No one under this roof will ever be sold. No one will be separated from family. No one will work without pay." A murmur went through the gathered people, hope and disbelief mingled together like oil and water that hadn't yet learned to mix. "What about Graves?" someone called from the back. "Graves is gone," Eliza said firmly. "Sheriff Briggs escorted him off the property this afternoon. He won't be back." As darkness settled over the plantation, someone brought out a fiddle. Someone else produced a harmonica. Gradually, music began to fill the evening air, not the secret songs of sorrow that had sustained them in bondage, but celebration songs that spoke of new beginnings. Lila sat on the porch steps with the hymnal in her lap, watching families gather around the impromptu concert. Children who had never heard their parents sing freely now joined their voices to the growing chorus. "Child," Mama Ruth settled beside her, "you done something powerful today. Something that's going to change more than just this place." "It wasn't just me," Lila said. "It was everyone. Nettie, finding courage to act. Miss Eliza choosing mercy. Pastor Amos and Essie helping strangers. Even Mr. Whitcomb doing his job, honest." "That's how change happens," Mama Ruth agreed. "One person at a time, one choice at a time, until enough folks choose courage over fear." The music swelled around them, voices blending in harmony that spoke of shared hope instead of shared oppression. Lila opened the hymnal one last time and found the song that seemed right for this moment. "We shall overcome." Her voice rose clear and true, carrying the melody that had guided their journey from darkness into light. Other voices joined Jonah's bass, Eliza's tentative soprano, Pastor Amos's steady baritone. The song spread through the gathered people, until everyone was singing, until the very air vibrated with the sound of freedom finding its voice. As the final notes faded into the soft Mississippi night, Lila touched her blue ribbon and tapped 3 times. Once for the journey completed, once for the family found, once for the future that stretched ahead like an unwritten song, full of possibilities that had never existed before. Lamplight flickered on the porch as Eliza brought out the family Bible, not to hide secrets in its margins this time, but to read aloud from its promises of justice and mercy. The leather book lay open in the golden circle of light, while moths danced overhead and nightbirds called from the cypress trees. "And ye shall know the truth," Eliza read, her voice carrying across the peaceful yard, "and the truth shall make you free." Green gold wax gleamed on the ribboned paper as Lila's last pure note hung over the porch and settled, gentle as night. "Freedom, once found, sings itself forward into every tomorrow."